Welcome to the Scandinavian Mind podcast, our weekly show about how technology is changing the creative industries. Today on the program, the power of passion economy. I am joined by our special guest, Gustaf Lundberg Toresson, to talk about what it means to be passion-driven in the social media space. We're going to talk about what you can learn from some of the biggest personalities in the world, the power of an audience, no matter which industry you come from. Gustaf is a Stockholm-based serial entrepreneur and the founder of the new media company Sequel, which recently launched a new interview show featuring some of the world's biggest personalities within business and culture. Guests include business leader Gary Vaynerchuck, DJs Giolí Assia, the fashion entrepreneur Matilda Djerf, as well as Joe Foster. Episode I know is coming up, the founder of Reebok. My name is Konrad, Olsson, editor-in-chief and founder of Scandinavian Mind. And I welcome Gustaf to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Konrad. It's a pleasure. I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm feeling awesome here on a Friday morning. We're doing these shows very topical. We record them every week, and I want to do this really current because we are just coming off the launch of your new interview show. You're launching new episodes every week, and I'm so excited getting into some of the learnings you've had from your interviews. But let's start with this question. Because when we got to know each other the first time, you spoke very much about this term passion economy. I'm fascinated by how you talk about that and how you're now building your media company around that term. So maybe we can just start by defining what you mean by passion economy.
Yeah, sure. So, passion economy is related to a concept people might have heard of, which is the creator economy. And they're sometimes used interchangeably. And I think there are different definitions of these. But the creator economy is basically having an audience, usually online, and making a living off of that. And there was this theory coming out in a paper that said you only need 1,000 true fans to make a living on your passion. The passion economy is kind of an umbrella above that. So the creator economy can be said to be a subset of the passion economy. So not only in social media, but the passion economy is monetizing your skills, which can be being a tennis teacher, for instance, and getting your clients through usually social media. So it's very related, but it's the phenomenon that has happened when all the gatekeepers in the middle, such as record labels and so on, have lost their power to individuals.
I mean, and I'm curious about your interest in this and how that grew, because I mean, in a way, you are now up to the test. You're launching your own media company, so now you're entering this space yourself, and it's going to be fascinating to follow. But why is this so particularly interesting to you?
I think this is so extremely interesting because of many reasons, actually. One of them is that when I looked into this a few years ago, I was just fascinated by entertainment. And I have a business background, and entertainment has not really been, I think, that accepted in the business world. If you call it media, then it's accepted as an industry. But if you're calling it entertainment, people are thinking about reality shows, but it can be so much more than that. And I just realized creators is the fastest growing small and medium-sized business type in the world. There are now like 50 million people that are defining themselves as creators globally. Oh. So that got me really interested. And I just realized with the power of all these new individuals that came up, usually through social media platforms, they gained so much power at often a very young age, and became business leaders, and I believe will also be in political power very soon. So that got me very interested and fascinated because I saw this power shift happening, but people were not really keeping up with this and understanding how big of an impact it would have. So a bit like 5, 6, 7 years ago, I started following this and been on the sidelines and always been thinking about like how I wanted to be involved in it.
Let's talk about the word creator for a second, because this is one, I maybe half a generation over you. I come from a more traditional journalistic background. When people started talking about creators 10, 15 years ago, that was like that's a cringe moment for me, because creator doesn't really, back then it didn't define your level of ambition, it didn't define your level of professionalism, it didn't define the level of journalistic integrity, so forth. It's more like it's defined that you just created stuff and put it out there. Has that term been more nuanced, do you think, or do you think that that covers that wide space of just people doing stuff and putting it out there?
I think it has become more nuanced, and I think now the word creator for most people usually has to do with something that reaches an audience in
Mm.
some way, as opposed to before, where it probably could be interchanged with the word artist or creative.
Yeah.
So I think it's a nuance there, because a creator is probably putting out something to people to create value of some
Mm.
sort. So I think that's where the shift has happened, that these people usually have found a group somewhere in the world that have similar interests to them, as opposed to historically, where, let's say before internet and before web 2.0, for instance, where you would be in your local area, in your city or your village, and it would probably be hard for you to find other people with an interest in Smurfs or whatever your
Yeah.
interest is. But there's some people out there in the world that do have these interests, for sure, because it's billions of people out there. And when these people got connected, I think these creators started to grow, because you realized, oh, I'm not limited to my local area with my interests. I can actually be somewhere in the world and delivering value to other people that have interests like me.
No, I mean, and that's completely true, and I think also worth mentioning, before we get into the work you're doing with SQL, and everything, but the kind of intersection of business and creator. And I'm curious if that was an entry point for you. I mean, you have founded companies. You come from a kind of like a tech startup background, and we've seen this kind of wave now the past few years, with personalities coming out. They are entrepreneurs, they've created companies, but there's also kind of an expectation on you that you also need to be out there and speak and be on panels and have your podcast and be on Twitter and be kind of a thought leader and have this enormous output of content and being a creator. It, has this been an entry point for you when thinking about this?
Honestly, yes. It's funny, because I've always been fascinated and interested in the world of content creation and entertainment and so on, but I've never really felt a natural entry point, and
Mm,
I've never really identified myself as a creator before, because I've never really seen how I would fit into that. And especially, I studied in a very traditional university and kind of got formed into the social expectations based off of that. And then
mm,
I think you're in a lot of circles that kind of boosts that and puts you even further from um, this, the content world, so to speak. And for me, I was always very drawn between these two sides in my life. So I actually went studying acting after I was done with business school, just because I wanted to get into a totally different bubble. And I
mm.
think that was like the spark of where I realized it's two different worlds, but these can be combined in some way. And I want to really find out how. And then it took years for me to really do that. And I've had a diary for almost 15 years, and I can read in my diary 7 or 8 years ago that I was actually planning something like this already then. So it's been in the works for a long time. And then I actually started interviewing people for a magazine. I started writing articles, and that's when I realized, wow, okay, storytelling. I love interviewing people. I
Yeah.
love interesting conversations and interesting places, interesting people. So that's when I found, like, okay, wow, this is my thing. This
And
is
that
what I love.
was that Forbes, or was that another magazine you?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
Forbes actually reached out to me and asked me to write about the passion economy specifically. So that was the first one. And then I actually started out writing theory and articles. But then after a year or so, I started doing interviews.
Got it. Well, I think here's where our interests align very much. So our interest in interviewing people and learning about their experiences. So let's talk about the concept of sequel. You just launched. I think now when we published this Friday, it's a little over a week ago, week and a half. Published 3 episodes. And more coming. What's Describe the concept around sequel and what you want to do with it, because the guests are kind of all over the place in terms of which industries they're working with, so that's not a common denominator.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess it's no news to everybody that, you know, probably even 4 years ago, people would say everybody and their grandmother has a podcast. So I knew that. And I was thinking about this already from the beginning. So the point of sequel is actually both selfish and a little bit selfless in a way, but I really felt these 5, 6, 7 years ago when I was writing in my diary, like, how should I do something about this? That's when I wanted to have something like this, because sequel is really about understanding lifestyles of other people, and specifically people in creative industries and business. And sequel is the word for a runner-up, often in a movie or a cultural piece of some sort. And here it's about multiple chapters in life. So it's a way to show people that life can be a lot of different chapters or sequels. And it's to portray these in forms of conversations with interesting people who have done really unusual things. So it's about lifting their lifestyles, finding out how they've done things, and also, most importantly for me, actually, is to make it as valuable as possible for the listener to get really hands-on advice on things they can do, today. So an example of that can be brainstorming a business idea together with the founder of Reebok. I want to have the listener or the watcher leaving the episode feeling 1% stronger, 1% stronger, and maybe doing something with that business idea the next week. So it's things like that. And I'm just so incredibly passionate about making people understand that life doesn't need to be the way that your bubble tells you or what you've think since before. I've worked in consulting companies and actually in the finance industry, like JP Morgan and Boston Consulting Group, which is not media, but I work with media clients. So I was always like really intrigued by how it worked. And now I realize, fast forward all these years later, another thing that I think is super interesting with media is that the actual product you're fulfilling and delivering to people is also your marketing.
Right.
And that's what I think is, I've never thought about it that way, but that is also super interesting. And then what you mentioned, that you have a very good excuse to get in front of very interesting people.
Well, let's talk about that, but because that's kind of the flywheel promise of media if you do it the right way. It's a way of documenting what you're doing. It's a way of marketing yourself and your product. It's a way of positioning yourself as a kind of a thought leader in your space. One of the persons that has been really a messiah of this message is one of your first guests, Gary Vaynerchuck. He is a master of all the social medias. I can't believe how he does it. But I think he has a team of like 10 people documenting him every second of the day and just pushing that content out on all the platforms there is. He has millions of followers on. I think that he's probably unique in the sense that I don't know any personality that has so many, like, other than like a world famous celebrity like Kardashian, but a business personality that has that many followers across all platforms, I think, is super unique. Was this one of the reasons you wanted to talk to him, or how did that come about?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been very fascinated by people like Gary, and specifically Gary. And I think what's so interesting with him is that he was super early in, and he has an intuition that is just admirable. And he is probably one of the loudest people on social media in the world, and he documents basically everything. And he preaches a lot of things that you should put out, X amount of pieces of content every day, which is, people that are discussing that. And I think he's not speaking to everybody, but I think what he's saying actually is so well thought through. And for some people, it can sound like cliches, but when I'm really listening to what he's saying and realizing that he's not speaking to everybody, but that can be put in front of new audiences, that's when I was like, this is probably the perfect stepping stone for what SQL is. And that's just somebody I really, really want to talk to. So it was a long process of both emails and people I've helped in the past to return a favor and so on. But that was actually a bit of a dream come true to have him in the first episode and talk about how he's done some of these things that he has, and also new things that he's never talked about before, because there are a lot of podcasts out there with Gary Vaynerchuck, but I really try to get him to talk about new things. And
what were some of the learnings from that interview? What were some of the things that you took away?
Like one of them actually is about the content creation itself. And he's saying this in the interview, that it's both selfish and selfless. And I think, like you said, building a personal brand or becoming a thought leader or whatever you want to call it, like all these things can on the outlook seem a bit selfish, I think, for somebody as a business leader to do something like that. But on the flip side, there are so many things that are happening kind of behind the scenes that people don't realize. So in his case, he was talking about people coming up to him abruptly at an airport and telling them how a video he made them like basically saved their life, and they went into rehab, and now they're thanking him, and he's in the security line in the airport, and just like crazy stories like that are impacts on people's lives that are probably not that obvious. And that was a really aha moment for me to realize, like, it's not only somebody building a personal brand or whatever, it's also inspiring a lot of people, probably helping a lot of people that you don't really think about. That was one of the aha moments for me. That was like, okay, wow, this is really powerful.
Yeah, there was a strong bit in the interview for sure. So one of the things I admire about the ambition of what you're doing is this international perspective. Obviously, we mentioned you're based in Stockholm. I know you have this kind of international lifestyle going on in your life, where you spend a lot of time in other countries. But with regards to who you interview and kind of the level of seniority and kind of the level of influence that the people you reach out to, it seems like you spend a lot of time just chasing these people down. Can you talk a little bit about sort of why you want to put this on this international level, and the level, the efforts you put into just reaching these people?
Yeah, I think it all roots back actually to my mother was scared of flying when I was young, and my dad really didn't enjoy traveling. So before I was 18, I had probably traveled to not that many countries. I had a big goal when I was 18 to I'm gonna reach, I don't know how many countries I said, but it was like I'm gonna go to 80 or 100 countries. So I've had that in me for a long time, to just be traveling and seeing a lot of places and how people live. So I spent, I think, around 6 years abroad, living abroad and working abroad in different countries in different parts of the world, and got to know a lot of people, and just realized, like, okay, I want to work on an international level, and I think that's just super fascinating. So that's always been, I've always had jobs that have been in English, and I worked in the UK, and I've studied in Canada and in Australia and so on. So I've always wanted to do it on an international level. So that was always the thought behind Sequa, that I want to lift this up to compete with the people having the big shows in the US and so on. And then it was basically a challenge of, okay, how do I reach these people that are very in demand for a show like this and so on. So I wanted to make it into a combination of both the classic podcast guests. So if people listening to this listen to podcasts, they know that some of these people are coming back and returning to many of the shows, and they're almost professionals at being podcast guests. But I wanted to mix them with people who had never been in shows and that are just a little bit different and kind of like repackage their message, which I think is great. So one case is Sita Avian, who is like a multi-artist, DJ, stylist, designer, doing so many things, but haven't been in, as far as I know, any podcast. And I wanted to make a combination of this and have it all in English, even when it's Swedes on the show, such as Matilda, to make it reach a wider audience and really put this on an international level from start. So that was the thought behind it.
I think Matilda is a very fascinating example. It feels like one of those fashion personalities that kind of bypassed the Swedish scene and just went straight global. Obviously, it's not my cup of tea, whatever the thing she's doing, but I'm fascinated by her as a an entrepreneur. And so this episode launches next week. Just pick. I want to pick up on some of the learnings there. What did Matilda teach you?
Yeah, wow. I think her story has some common denominators with other stories that that will be coming, and also that are part of the first 3 episodes. That it's, you know, very few of these people have started out with a plan. It's more about they're starting out from a passion to do something. And in Matilda's case, it was posting photos, actually from a trip with her boyfriend. And for some reason, that gained a following in Australia and the US. And then it kind of just built from that. So that's what the passion economy is all about, that you doing something out of passion, and then that can challenge the traditional way of how you're supposed to live your life. So she was working at a juice bar at the time. And then, you know, she could quit her job and try out to do this new type of career that wasn't possible 5 or 10 years earlier than that. Fast forward now, 3 years in, they've built a $35 million revenue company with a 30% profit margin. They own almost all of it, and they're rapidly growing. And
Jesus
it's crazy. It's almost unheard of. So the first year they did 2 million. The second year they did 8 million. So that's a quadruple increase. The third year they're doing 35. So yeah, you know, that's a 4x increase again. And the ceiling is not even close. So it's just like, that just gives you like a view of the power of these things. And I just think it's incredibly fascinating. So that's taught me so much about, you know, the power of an audience and the power of you know, actually doing what you really love, which sounds like such a cliche, but it's a big mega trend in the world.
Let's stick on this for. I think this is interesting. It's both because we're now more in my wheelhouse, it's more closer to fashion, but I think it's interesting to, you know, dissect this a little bit in terms of, is there a formula to this that people can learn from, or is she an anomaly? Like, is she just one of those things that happen, you know, one in a million type of things, where she just struck a chord and she found the audience and she's able to, you know, very very talently monetize that audience with the production of her clothes. Yeah, just reflect on that, and I'm curious. Let's get into it, because you say that this is an example of the passion economy. This is an example of, if you do it, you know, wholeheartedly with your own kind of voice, you know, build it and they will come type of thing. You know, build the audience and the rest will follow. What's your take on this?
I think it's super fascinating. And, you know, as you know, these platforms and kind of the stage, quote unquote, the digital stage you're standing on, which is coming and going platforms, and some are staying. So YouTube has been around for 20 years, but so that is always changing, obviously. But irrespectively of that, I've seen that there are 2 different kinds of these people. And one of them is basically just, like you said, like having a lucky strike in a way. Those are getting fewer and fewer, is what I'm feeling. And I've not really interviewed somebody like that yet, but that would be interesting. The other kind is somebody who has 1 or 2 moments that, you know, it's a video that goes viral, or it's just 1 or 2 things that get picked up, and then they understand why that happened.
Like the catching a wave almost. Like,
Catching a wave, exactly, like a surfboard, and then understanding the value. What value am I creating? Like, why are people reacting to this? And the value can be you're entertaining, or you're saying something that people can identify with, or you're teaching people, and so on. They're like, depending on how you divide it, but it's like 5 or 6 different things you can create value for people. And I think it's these people that have really understood that they're doing that, as opposed to just putting out more things, as in form of content or whatever, without an intention. Um, so that combined with the passion of them really wanting to do it, even though they wouldn't grow as they did, I think that's like the winning formula. Because my takeaway is basically that a lot of these people that have become successful through this would have done it even if they wouldn't be successful, if that makes sense. Like,
right.
they
Yeah.
really, they're investing so much of their life into this that they wouldn't do it for that long, um if they wouldn't love it that much. So it's like pure love for what they're doing, which is, I just think it gives me goosebumps because it's like so cool.
Well, that love for what you're doing is almost like the holy grail in the lifestyle industry. And I think what this represents is, if you love what you do, if you're in it, if you're in it, no matter if you're successful or not, you're doing it anyways. It's almost like everything you do, every step you take, every post you do, every photo you upload is a part of your story. And here's where I think traditional brands are struggling to kind of pivot into that type of mindset, because traditional brands have employees that are maybe just there for their salary. They're not there
Mhm.
for the long run. And we see the most powerful brands are the ones that can attach a personality that can kind of um, represent that, that passion, that love, that can embody the brand, that can live the brand in every step of the way. But I think, when I advise companies, and we do a lot of kind of social media production and brand strategy and that sort of thing, you know taking the leap, even though I know it's there, even though I know the company has a founder that are passionate about what they're doing, they have so much knowledge about their space, and I'm just like, put it out there, just start talking. It becomes like a hesitation because uh, you're not as used to being on social media, or you're not as comfortable speaking or putting your face out there, or whatever it might be. But I feel like, and here's where I want your take on this. I feel like there's so much value to unlock if you can tap into this way of communicating, where kind of always be kind of always on and speaking about your thing. That will ultimately be good in the long run. Am I right here, or what do you think?
Oh, 100%. And I think, speaking about that, self-awareness, well, being too self-aware almost to be kind of scared, or what it could be, or just not interested in doing it. But
Mm,
I think a lot about it is just worrying what people think for those first few things you're doing. And I've been there, more than most people I know, to really care about that. But what I realize, is that it it's such a impactful thing that you can do. And for instance, speaking of businesses, I interviewed, a surgeon in the UK who is now the biggest surgeon on TikTok.
a
Uh,
surgeon,
surgeon, a heart
a
surgeon, no,
doctor, like,
a doctor, yeah. Not a heart surgery, bowels, and like,
okay.
stomach. And that's completely changed his, not only life but also career. And he's being asked to speak at, like, I can't remember now, but the NHS, like the big national convention in the UK.
Mm,
And and for lawyers that are getting clients from, putting out really simple tips out there. But it's just like the really simple things, but actually creates value for a lot of people, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't engage with it or follow it. And I think it's about finding that, like, the intersection of what do I actually like doing and might want to put out there. It's not for everybody, definitely, but what would I want to speak about, and how can that intersect with what people actually could be interesting? And I think, if you look at yourself and you're a surgeon, you might think, who would want to know really obscure facts about how the bowel system works, or like something like that? But obviously millions and millions and millions of people do. And I just think that's super interesting, and I have so many examples of this, of like crazy stories like these. And one of them I really want to bring up is, it's it's a Twitter account which is about finance, but it's comedy in finance. So it's an anonymous kind of meme account, and its profile picture is an AI picture. So it's not even a real person, but he is just making a lot of jokes. And I saw this happening over a year or something, a year and a half. And this person started engaging with like the power players of the tech industry, like the biggest, venture capital founders. Elon Musk was liking every single tweet. I was like, who is this person behind the account? Emailed, I sent a lot of emails, and then I got an introduction through mutual friends somehow. And then I got this person on a Zoom call, and I was like, wait a minute, is that you? So this was like a 21-year-old freshman at a university in the UK, at a total random university, and nobody knew about this, not even his friends. So here he is, first year student, making comedy for the power players of the global economy, basically. And then he was DMing, I think it was Chamat at Social Capital, about getting an internship at his VC firm over the summer. And that, it's like the access those people get from doing something like this that you just love doing, it's incredible. And I was like, oh my god, that made me stunned.
That's amazing. What's the name of the account?
Parik Patel.
Parik Patel.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, those two examples are, to me, almost like they're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. One is the kind of upstart, and it goes back to what we're talking about before, like create some kind of media and use that as a springboard to whatever it is you want to do. Create media to get access, to create media to open doors, and this is a perfect example of that. The other example with the surgeon, I think, goes back to my question around, is being a creator, does it imply some kind of expertise? And I think what I find interesting is now we're moving towards a space where more and more experts are going into kind of the creator economy, and I guess you can call it passion economy. You really enlightened me on this term, but when I try to find new things on social media all the time, I try to make a conscious effort to find useful content, and content that's productive and positive, and not to go down different rabbit holes of negativity. But to your point, there's so much stuff out there which is really educational and can help me as an entrepreneur, or can help me as a content creator or a journalist, or whatever it is. Is this something that has happened during the last years, and how do you see this projecting? Will we see a much more influx of quote unquote real experts doing creator work, so to speak?
I think so, because I think what many realize when they start getting started is that to find some sort of quality in what you're doing, you need to first start with quantity. Because you don't really know what your voice is, and you don't really know what to put out there after you've put out X amount of pieces of content. Let's say it's 100, and then what you're actually going to talk about. So you first need quantity to get quality, which creates a lot of noise. And I guess it's news to nobody that it's a lot of noise out there. And that's where I think these niches and why these get really popular. So one of the most popular TikTok accounts, I think it's somebody bringing minks to farms and cleaning out the farms, and it's one of these like weird satisfaction things, but it's just crazy. And it's like super niched. Or somebody cleaning pools that is huge, and their company, which is a pool cleaning company, is now, it's like 10x their revenue in like 1 year or something. 2 years. I read a story about it. And definitely, like, that's the thing. Like, I think the more niched you can be, but still, finding this intersection of you really want to do it, even if nobody would look at it, and people find some sort of value from it, in this
Yeah.
case satisfaction, then I think, that's circling back to my point. I think you're not only going to be 10xing your revenue, if you strike it like this guy, but in 15 years, I think, maybe even 10 years, I think, like, the next big political leaders will have started this way. Like, the next, maybe not the next, but the US president in the two next elections might be somebody who started out on YouTube. I would not be surprised at all.
That's super fascinating. Do you have any best practices or recommendations to let's say a company or a person that is hesitant to going into this space, or starting to create content, and being exposing yourself to these platforms? What's the way to go about it, do you think?
So I think there are a lot of advice out there that say, just put something out there. And like, I think maybe people have heard these things, which I do agree with, but I've always heard that advice before. And I think, for me, what I've realized is that it's really about finding something that, I'm circling back to this, like, what would you do in your spare time that wouldn't at all reward you in a way?
Mm,
So, starting a media business, it's not like, you can do a lot of things that would have a better financial impact. And I think, for me, like, I realized that, but I was like, yeah, but even if I would do something else, I would probably do this in my spare time. And I think that's when you found something that is, whether you're dancing on TikTok or you're putting out advice regarding like legal advice.
mm,
um, that's my biggest advice, is look at what you're doing in your spare time. Are you playing a lot of golf? Are you traveling to certain locations that people are always asking you for recommendations for restaurants? Whatever it is, I would look at, what am I doing in my free time, and then I would, like, twist that, because that's so much more powerful than trying to come up with something that you think will fill a gap, because then you're not going to be able to sustain that for a long period of time, because then that will need you to become successful in order for it to be fun.
mm.
But if you start in that end, I think it's going to be so much harder. If you instead start in the end of, I would anyway do this, I'm playing golf, or I'm playing tennis, I'm going to just record it, and then I'm going to put out my best tips on Twitter, and then let's see what happens. I have zero expectations. Those are the success stories.
Fascinating. Okay, well, which brings us. Sadly, we have to round up soon. I feel like we can talk about this for forever. I'd love to have you back on the show. But what is your trajectory then? So you're now beginning this journey with SQL. You have a background in starting companies, kind of working in the startup space. With I know you have some engagement with VC companies and so forth. Will this be your 100% new venture, or do you think this will be something that you always keep on the side with different projects? How do you balance it?
So my plan is, actually, by design now. I haven't made very long plans in order to just keep the pressure off myself, but I definitely have a vision,
Mm,
and I really, really love this, and I'm talking straight from the heart. And like, the conversations I realize is something I would, even if there wouldn't be a camera, I would 100% continue doing these conversations. So
it's
it's
easy to
kind.
get Gary Vaynerchuck if you do have a camera, though.
It is, yeah. It helps, definitely. But I would continue. I will definitely continue with this, hopefully for 15 plus years, with the actual show. And then Sequel itself is a venture, and it's a media company. So I want to build this into a new form of media company, which is a
Mm,
mix of business and culture. And it will be a lot of video, but it would also be text and so on. So I want to use the medium that we're in, which is video, and I'll probably being very early into new platforms coming. But packaging news, so both business news, but also culture news, and
mm,
packaging conversations to audiences that haven't seen these people before.
mm.
That's kind of like the idea behind it.
I love that, and that's the way we use Scanner in Mind as well. I mean, it's both an output, but it's also insights gathering. I mean, we learn so much from doing the journalistic work and all the conferences and everything. Just to end on also a more a positive note and educational note. Is there something you've learned from these interviews, maybe from your interview with Reebok, or that have influenced the way you think about your new company?
Many things. It's what I've learned and been taken away is, it's a lot of things. I've realized that having an audience is definitely it's kind of like steroids. But I think one of the really important things is that it's just so much more important to have something that you can do for a very long time and long term, like really thinking about, I can be doing this for 15 years without having a big exit or whatever it can be, and really enjoy my life during that time, instead of waiting for something to happen and then afterwards life is gonna become whatever I want it to be. Like, I think that's the big, like, the big thing that I've learned from many of the people that I've talked with, that instead trying to kind of like design your lifestyle while you're doing things, instead of doing something and then hoping that your life is gonna become whatever you want it to be. I think that's that's something that really helps you get through so many things, and makes you live life now, not later.
So, just to round it up, where can people find this? What platforms are you on? Give us a website so people can find the show.
Yeah, so Sequel is released on Tuesdays on YouTube and Thursdays on Spotify, Apple, and the other platforms. So it's actually meant to be watched. So search for SEQUEL and Gary if you want to come to the Gary episode, which is the first one. We have 3 episodes released now. The next one is coming on Tuesday. Instagram, Sequel, @Sequel Show. Mine is @GLTORE. And the website will be released next week, but it's sequelstories.com.
Wonderful. Gustaf Lundberg Toresson, founder of the new media company Sequel, focusing on culture and business. Thank you for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Scandinavian Mind podcast. Please make sure to sign up to a newsletter. Visit scandinavianmind.com/newsletter not to miss out on any upcoming content and events. We're launching our next print issue of Scandinavian Mind, issue 4, in about a month. So sign up to get early access to that one. Until next time, goodbye.